Well, I think first, normally you would see governments kind of drive these types of funds when they have a lot of excess money, essentially surpluses in their government in the government budgets. The reality, though, for Canada, we have significant deficits, so we are looking at probably funding this through further deficits, or at least more borrowed money ultimately. And I think it's a driving force of this again is that some certain projects might not get the go ahead without some form of government backing. This is essentially the government looking at putting some equity dollars in there and hopefully getting that return in the long term.
Right. And so it starts with, as you said, $25 billion in seed money. And the prime minister was asked about that this morning. Where is that going to come from? And he basically just said there's going to be some good news in tomorrow's spring economic update, and alluding to perhaps a smaller than previously announced deficit. But I mean, how far would that go toward starting an investment fund like this?
Yeah, well, I think we're looking at $25 billion over 3 years. I think in terms of what I read around the seed money, a smaller deficit will allow for some of the reallocation of that deficit spending towards this fund. So there's probably going to be some room there that they're going to move things around a bit. When I do look at this, it's what we kind of want to see in terms of trying to drive these projects. Those are long-term factors. I think there's also the very interesting aspect that Canadians will have that some sort of access to invest directly into this vehicle as well. So that fund that they're trying to grow will have the access both from government, both from some of the returns from some of these investments, as well as potentially Canadians allocating some of their own savings to this fund as well.
That's just it. And so, with Canadians being able to invest, as you said, we're kind of in difficult economic times. Do Canadians have that extra money to be able to put money toward this?
Well, I think that they will. The question is, where is that going to come from? In some cases, it might be an allocation, right? So instead of buying up in other types of investments, they may just again shift that savings, shift that investment into this fund. When we look at some of the wording of it, it does suggest that the capital will be safe. So if people invested, that might guarantee capital, at least what their investment is, and potential for some type of return going forward, especially if those projects actually come to fruition as well. So there is going to be a lot of question about how this is going to work. I think it is a vehicle. We have to be very careful that we're not crowding out some of the investments we would have seen in other companies or organizations that otherwise would have received some of these funds.
What does it mean to be essentially relying on individual Canadian investors to move these major infrastructure projects forward?
Well, I think that there is, it might appeal to certain folks that do want to put that money into, again, something more national. Most of these projects themselves are going to be domestic. And again, get some of that return from those projects if they go forward. I think that some of these projects, whether they go forward, might depend on some aspects of the public, that there's a little bit of public backing here through private equity. It just provides either that de-risking aspect of these projects. But for individuals, I think there will be some who want to look at potentially see it as a little more safe in terms of as an investment, and others, they again will be looking at it through a different lens of national sovereignty as well.
What if, some of these projects we know have some opposition to them? For example, the idea of a new pipeline. I mean, how much will kind of the public appetite factor into how this fund grows and how these projects move forward?
Yeah, well, there's going to be different projects that are obviously going to have a lot of different challenges. And I think when we look at the major projects that we're kind of seeing pushed forward, or at least promoted right now, a lot of it is that mining side, potential for LNG, and including in BC, there's quite a few of these projects at play. I think these will still go through the normal consultation process, and this fund looks like it will be independently managed. So there's going to be a board directive of where, I think, of what type of projects that they're allowed to invest in as well domestically.
This is a first for Canada, but there are sovereign wealth funds in other jurisdictions and other countries. What do we know? What are the lessons to be learned about how successful they are?
Well, one of the things I think in the Canadian context here is that, again, this is a federal fund. It's not clear ultimately how, over the long term, how it will be funded. A lot of it will be about, some of the reinvestment dollars as well as the project profits from these projects as well. But a lot of it is normally driven by royalty revenues, and I think royalties are largely provincial in Canada as well. So I think this project, this overall fund, it's still very small. So I think it'll be really pinpointed at certain projects that they really want to get over the line as well in terms of a sort of nation building. How it's going to fare, it is a good question. It's not clear, but in terms of the return, they just need to really get above their government borrowing costs, which is still relatively lower than what we would see in the private sector.
And so tomorrow is that spring economic update. What are you expecting?
Well, I think that the overall deficit, again, will be smaller than what was initially projected. I think that's, again, driven by some of the commentary around this, Prime Minister Carney's own commentary around this as well. So there's going to be a little more room to drive some of these projects forward. And ultimately, I think the government is really keying in on trying to restructure this economy a lot more, given a lot of the risks that we're seeing around our trade relationship with the U.S. as well. We know that the review of the CUSMA is coming forward, and it's probably not going to be a very easy type of a negotiation. And I think the government ultimately wants us to be a little bit more self-sufficient, have more diversification ultimately in our overall economics.
And before I let you go, Bryan, what do you think this announcement of a sovereign wealth fund, what does it mean for individual Canadians?
Well, I think it's not a lot when it comes to individual Canadians. Again, it's a pretty small fund. It does suggest that in the current environment we're in, which is pretty tough when we look at this from across various provinces, this could provide a boost for some of these projects. And I think that would be quite positive, especially when we think about some of the rural outlying areas which have been hit by downturns in areas like forestry, for example. Getting projects on the go would be very helpful in that regard.
Okay, but in terms of that sort of promise that the Prime Minister was talking about, you have a stake in this. You will be able to benefit from this. Do we have a clear sense of that yet right now?
No, I don't think we can say that yet. I think that if they set up these various financial products that people can invest in, there's obviously some upside there, potential for Canadians who want to find that investment. But at this point, I think we just kind of look at it through as another vehicle to drive economic growth over the longer term.